Good day there, people. You may want to get a cup of coffee or some sort of beverage. Get yourself comfortable. I don't know how long this one is going to take. There's so many items that I want to talk about, and it's following up, I guess, some of the concerns and issues that were raised over the last couple of videos. And I want to see if I can clarify this. I think the thing that I want to talk about is David Bohm's work and his notion. He's coming out of Krishnamurti, but his notion of incoherence. And I mean, he kind of says it like this. If you read On Dialogue, anyway, and there's Bohm has a good amount of work, and so Krishnamurti has many books. The dialogue that they did called The Ending of Time is a really good resource there, and so is The Awakening of Intelligence. But if you go just to David Bohm's book On Dialogue, and I'll post a couple of links to that. I have shot other videos on that, but he suggests that there is a kind of collective thought which it surpasses any individual, and all said, it's incoherent. It rambles around, and each individual sort of participates in that collective thought, and their own thought follows out the eddies and streams of, I guess, popular notions. If we try to think, why do we think what we do? Well, we breathe in the atmosphere and we traffic in the environment of I guess, the thoughts and ideas of other people. It's like a symbolic environment that we're, like fish within. And I guess we oftentimes don't notice all of the different ways that we could say thought is incoherent. And I don't mean an individual's thought. Like, we could spell out individuals. I could pick on my own thought here and go, look how incoherent it is. It's all over the place on what's being claimed. And maybe it's helpful to pick on myself. That might make it less dissonancy for other people. But I think we could say everyone's thought. Their thought is basically just incoherent. It's all over the place. And I'm going to see if I can try to talk about that a little bit more. Okay, so one of the things that I said in my last video was that it would seem to be the case, and this was the claim that I was making at the time, it would seem to be the case that people who claim that the universe is fully deterministic and that consciousness could have not been, that's a kind of incoherence. And again, maybe it's not, maybe it is, but I was suggesting that the claim that consciousness could have not been really kind of aligns with a kind of atheism, or at least a robust atheism that isn't a counter-theism. It isn't just, going against some dominant religion, but it gives a real grounding that, look, life is a fluke. Whereas the person who says consciousness couldn't have not been, and the spiritual import of that fact, of the reality of the fact that consciousness could not have been, is something to really stick on, and say that this is the spiritual significance, right? You go to a kind of fact, right? And the fact is that consciousness couldn't have not been. Now, some people would say, well, what was the evidence that you have for that? Okay, well, I don't think we have evidence for either, right? Could consciousness have not been? We don't know. Was consciousness necessary? We don't know. The fact is, though, that we do have consciousness, and that consciousness did occur, and we can witness it for ourselves. But I think these larger issues of, is that really a theism or atheism? Maybe not. I mean, maybe all that was just incoherent. I'm trying to get at. I look at Hawking's, and when his recent book comes out, he sort of says, look, life was precast by the physical forces that rule the material universe, and that given the amount of time we have, the amount of time that was there to work with, life didn't need any, quotes, divine intervention. It just naturally would come out of stuff. The materiality of it all. It is interesting, try to, again, think about some analogies here for just a second. If I say that take a seed, for example, I take a flower seed. The seed, it doesn't have the smell of the or the fragrance of the flower in the seed, right? I think we want to say, look, if you just look at a seed, you can smell it, you don't smell anything. And then the plant, the seedling sort of breaks out of that seed, and slowly it has a green stalk, and then slowly, eventually, a budling pops up, and then a flower comes, and as that flower opens, the plant, it gives off a fragrance, and that fragrance, something that we smell and can appreciate. Now, was the fragrance there all along? No, it wasn't. Was it destined to come out and to be released at some point? Well, assuming that the soil would have been right and the conditions were right and there was enough moisture and oxygen and all kinds of other things, carbon dioxide, things that were in the air, pressure. Given conditions, all of those sequences come out. Now, to say that the fragrance of the flower, it was destined to be there or was precast by the materiality, it's sort of an interesting analogy. One is that the fragrance of the flower, it's an odd kind of property because it's not really a property of the flower. That is, it's not a structural dynamic located within the flower per se. That is, the fragrance assumes a kind of larger commerce and interaction with the larger world, someone or something to whom that fragrance could be registered. And so there is a kind of larger interaction with the environment already precast by that flower, not just in terms of its own internal development by taking in its environment, but of a reaching back outward into the environment from which it grew. Now, the fragrance will last only so long, and then that plant, the flower, will shrivel up and it will die, and that's the life cycle of that flower. Now, although the fragrance wasn't there at the seed, isn't there at the early plant, isn't really there at the budling, but only appears at the blooming of the flower, and then it disappears after it's dried up and died, I think we still want to say, no, that fragrance is real and it's part of the flower. Again, it gets tricky. It's an experience that is part of the flower. It's a larger interactive experience with the flower, and I guess it's something that we don't have to say that the fragrance was there all along and has to be there after the flower in order to be real. That is, the reality of the fragrance of the flower isn't caught within a needing to be present all along. Its emergence through a kind of temporal development is, that's what it is. And I guess if you try to imagine consciousness, again, metaphorically, somewhat like that consciousness is a kind of, it's a floral bouquet that comes out of a certain blooming organism, and there were obviously, millions and millions of years before life began, or again, that could be incoherent, right? Our definition of life could be, as of yet, really weak. I think part of the problems that were being discussed was this, well, where will you draw the line of when life begins? Was consciousness always there? I mean, some of the problems that people were having too are about time. The issue of, does time need consciousness? Now, there's an obvious sense in which you're going to fall into a solipsism and make just ridiculous category mistakes if you try to say that time needs consciousness. I mean, there was a long quotes period of time under which the originary matter which ended up forming our solar system and again led way to the emergence of life, all these kinds of things. I don't think anyone's denying that took a certain amount of period that now we in our consciousness can measure. See, part of the problem is that time, when you when you go to time, there's lots of different kinds of time. I mean, Aristotle defines time as counting that accompanies movement with reference to the earlier and the later. So, I mean, we sometimes say that time is movement or time is change, and there's a lot that's very right-minded. But it also seems like there's another kind of time, which is the counting that accompanies the movement, and you have to be there, quotes, before and after. So, if I'm going to time something, I begin the counting and then I cease the counting and I measure the time lapsed. That's a kind of time, and we do have lots of ways to measure time that way. But there's another kind of time, which is the time that we are, which I've talked about it many, many ways, a sort of existentialist orientation, which doesn't have us there before the counting begin and then after the counting ends, or before it begins and then after it ends, that I guess we have some sense of being thrown and we emerge to ourselves, and then by the time we die, we're not really there for it. It's something that's wholly for other people. Our ultimate demise. It's something that will be registered by others. And there's just so much that's going on here in terms of coherence and incoherence. I saw a video where Richard the Dick Coughlin was kind of picking on Venom Fang X and saying, Venom Fang X, I want to know if you really think you're going to live forever and you're all happy to be, with your savior in the afterlife. Well, aren't you kind of hoping, I mean, not really hoping, because it has to happen by natural causes, where he sort of does this, but aren't you kind of hoping that you get hit by a bus in the morning and you just take a quick death, because that will take you off into your eternal bliss, your happily ever after? And I think it was kind of an interesting issue or question, because I think there is something that he was getting at that I want to talk about. Again, it's related to all of this. It's all in there. It's part of the incoherence stuff. Like, is there something about responsibility that's agonizing? I think there is. If you go to oncology wards, I don't think anybody wants a diagnosis of cancer. Okay, no one wants, oh yeah, I'm happy about that. But there's something about no longer having to be responsible for anything, no longer having to suffer the agony of choice and decision and of right life. I mean, I think if you imagine that life is an ongoing trial where you're exercising your will, and you don't need a happily ever after, you don't need some sort of, I guess, ultimate recompense in the afterlife. You don't need to believe in life after death to see that there is a burden and an agony in life. I guess, on a related note here, there's this video that Pat Condell put up on Jesus, and it was fascinating. He's this famous atheist voice on YouTube, and tons of people, I mean, thing's got thousands of views. People love this video, and they go, oh yeah, Pat Condell, you say it, Jesus would come back and he would smack upside the head all these religious people. It's so fascinating the way that people who claim to be atheists can look to the historical Jesus as a model for, I don't know, moral self-righteousness, for what is moral superiority, of what is the right thing to do. I mean, there's some sense in which, why would anyone use Jesus as their model if you're an atheist? Why would you use that as your model? I mean, Jesus, he either knew he was the Son of God, and therefore he didn't have any sweat to be really worrying about. I mean, he really had it. Or he, if you want to say he had doubts and he was a person, well, then he's someone who we arguably should try to live up to if he was just a historical person. Well, from where came that freedom? Was it just determined? I mean, was it just in this person's genes, this historical person? Or maybe it's all just a myth. We don't know. But the fact that there are so many atheists who could find support for Pat in that video, it's fascinating. I mean, there's a kind of just incoherence, just all resonating through. And again, I see it in my own thought. It's not to point to any particular individual, but there are atheists who are looking to Jesus. We got people claiming that life and even consciousness couldn't have not been, that is, they were inevitable, or all of the conditions of the material universe were such that life with enough time would have emerged, and yet would claim to be atheist. I mean, I guess part of it is what does one mean by the divine? What does one mean by any of this stuff? It's all just so incoherent. I guess it's hard to express that, or to get at with a kind of clarity how, again, how thought is just a mess. It's just such a mess. I don't even know how to say it clearly. When I watch YouTube's and I watch my own videos and I watch the responses, there's this David Bohm moment happens. It just seems like there's incoherence all around. That the best we could hope for is to have all of us stop for a second and really just watch the thought. Watch your reactions to it. Watch your emotional rilings to it. I think it is funny that I'm thinking again about that theory of everything. And the theory of everything is funny because it does so much with cognitive dissonance. And I mean, one of the ways to get at cognitive dissonance would be, let's just go back to the historical Jesus guy. Okay, so we find out that there is this historical Jesus, and that no one really knows if he is the Son of God. He's just some guy who seems to be luminous and or radically challenging not only the authorities at the time, but basically a lot of the belief systems at the time, and he's revolutionizing Greek thought and all kinds of other things that are going on, Roman thought. I think the question would be, would people, if you'd find someone who is perfect, whatever that would mean, if you'd find some person who is literally holier than thou in all regards, and doing it for free, whatever that is, wouldn't people feel the need to kill this person? I mean, I wonder how many of us could stand the idea of someone genuinely, really being better. And I don't mean like they could dunk a basketball better and they were better at external things. But I don't think that's what it's about. I'm talking about better in terms of self-disciplined command over self, self-realization, patience, kindness, the kinds of things that require an exercise of the will, of a kind of conditioning of oneself. I mean, I think there is, and I mean, there's some of the incoherence too. I see it in Counterpoint, Nicotine's recent videos, which, I like Nick's videos. So many of his videos are really great. His last couple of videos, I didn't have any comments on them, but I was so surprised that people weren't more critical. I was so surprised that people weren't really giving some thumbs down and going, dude, this is in some way, I mean, from a bonus, this is incoherent. It's incoherent. We're going to try to apply the same kind of objective standard of detached observation to ourself as we do to the world. I mean, there's a sense in which none of that makes any sense. It's ridiculous. Can you try to understand phenomena which do what they do, independent of us? Yeah. You want to get at weather patterns? Do you want to understand morphology of different organisms? Do you want to understand celestial regularities? There's just all kinds of things that do what they do independent of conscious observation and conscious decision making. But to try to then do that to conscious decision making and thought, it becomes a kind of category error. You end up going, what? I mean, it, take speech and language rather than mind and consciousness. Just go to speech and language. You know, there's a categorical difference between talking about the world and then talk about our talk. That is, talk about our talk doesn't go on independent of us. The things that we talk about, so many of them, the things that we talk about, they will do what they do regardless of how we talk about them or whether we talk about them. Will the sun rise whether I talk about it or not? Will that flower come into bloom with or without my talk? Yes, but my own talk doesn't come into existence without my talk. I mean, you have a category mistake going on. I, some of this is, it's so hard to just sit down. I mean, it would take hours to sit down, and I don't think, you know, that we could, me or anyone else could sit down and just get thought clear. It's it's a mess. It's there's this huge ongoing sea of collective thought that it's fragmentary, it's broken, it's in pieces, and it's a bunch of people with irons in their hand trying to stamp out waves on water. It just makes more mess. I don't know how to round this out. I'm just blathering here at length. There were so many videos that I wanted to talk about, so many things that were going on, and I guess it's just a long, blathery, run-on Sunday video. Okay, thanks.